Evelyn collapsed onto my floor with a dull thud, like someone had dropped a sack of flour on the tile. The half-finished whiskey glass was still in her hand, amber liquid spilling across the imported wool rug, seeping in like fake blood in a cheap TV drama. Foam bubbled at her mouth, her eyes rolled back, her heels clattered against the floor as her body convulsed. And you know what the first thought in my head was? Not, oh God, save her. No. I thought, well, that glass was supposed to be mine. I knew because I'd seen it with my own eyes. My daughter-in-law, Melissa, had tipped something from a tiny vial into that very glass, the one with the faint crack on the rim, the one I always used. At my age, I don't believe in coincidences. I didn't gasp like some senile old fool. I didn't snatch the glass and make a scene. I just switched it, smooth as swapping a wrench from the toolbox. And Evelyn, Melissa's dear mother, was the one who picked it up, because she always grabbed the closest glass to her purse. My name is Richard Hale, 68 years old. I survived 40 years in construction, where subcontractors could pull the wrong rebar, contractors could vanish overnight, and the market crashed 3 times while I still had to make payroll. I made it through a wife who walked out and took the dishwasher with half the china I never liked. So a little poison in a whiskey glass. Honestly, that's gentler than the time I tried the Mediterranean diet my doctor recommended. Believe me, kale and quinoa nearly killed me before Melissa ever got the chance. You're listening to me now. And before I go any further, do me a small favor. Drop a comment, tell me where you're tuning in from. Because I bet no matter where you are, there's at least one father-in-law or mother-in-law out there sighing, watching their son-in-law or daughter-in-law act like the smartest person in the room. Share it. The funnier, the better. Now back to the chaos. People screamed, chairs toppled, shoes clattered as someone dialed 911. Melissa, my loving daughter-in-law, dropped to her knees beside her mother, wailing like she was auditioning for a medical soap opera. She cried out, "Mom, hold on, stay with me." Her voice shook, her hands trembled, but her eyes darted around the room, checking who was watching. I just laid a calming hand on a panicked neighbor's shoulder, but really I was studying Melissa closer than an architect squinting at blueprints. And I saw it, the thing most people missed. The real fear of someone whose plan had just gone sideways. Melissa wasn't shocked that her mother had collapsed. She was shocked that her scheme had slipped. And me, the intended victim, I was still standing, holding a fresh glass poured from an unopened bottle, sipping slowly like nothing happened. Now let me tell you why I stayed calm. Not because I don't feel, but after this many years, I've learned that screaming ruins your chance to see the truth. Sitting still, smiling, letting the other side believe they've won. That's how you catch a snake slithering through your house. 2 hours earlier, this house was full of laughter. Old colleagues, neighbors, and a few engineer friends all gathered to celebrate my retirement. 18 million from selling the company. Not bad for an orphan who started with calloused hands in a beat-up truck. My son Daniel insisted on the party. "Dad, you deserve it," he said, eyes shining like when he was a boy asking for pocket money. And then he let Melissa plan everything. Odd, since Melissa usually complains about unloading the dishwasher. But suddenly she was Martha Stewart. Flowers, polished glassware, hired bartenders. If you've ever seen a cat volunteer for a bath, you'll understand how unnatural it felt. I stood there with a whiskey in hand, chatting with old coworkers, but my eyes drifted to the drink table. Melissa pulled a vial from her purse, glanced around and poured it into the cracked glass. My stomach dropped. I'd seen the same trick on job sites. Someone slipping extra chemicals into the concrete mix. And just like then, I knew something dirty was happening. A normal man might have shouted, "Stop! What did you just pour in there? Not me." I just smiled, nodded through small talk about cement prices, and waited. When Melissa handed me the glass, her voice dripped sweet as syrup. "Dad, you must be tired. Have a sip to relax." I thanked her, looked her straight in the eye, and in those eyes I saw what I used to see in crooked contractors, the eager glint before payday. Instead of drinking, I waited. When she turned to brag about her new bracelet, I set the glass down beside Evelyn's purse. Just like I knew she would, Evelyn picked it up. She hated standing empty-handed. "Oh, this whiskey's nice," she laughed, taking a sip. I smiled to myself. The snake had swallowed its own tail. 5 minutes later, Evelyn wobbled. 10 minutes later, she hit the floor. 2 hours before Evelyn hit the carpet, my house looked like it had been borrowed from the pages of Better Homes and Gardens. Golden lights strung across the porch, lilies on the dining table, a banquet laid with crisp white cloth, bottles lined neatly in ice buckets. My old co-workers, the ones who only knew me in hard hats and safety vests, walked in wide-eyed. "Wow, Richard, your place looks like a resort," I just chuckled. They had no idea that most days this house was as quiet as an abandoned job site. The first thing that made me laugh was Daniel standing there with his arms folded like he'd hung every single light himself. Everyone knew if you handed him a drill, he'd put a hole in the wall before finding the nail. Truth was, he did exactly one thing. He let his wife, Melissa, run the whole show. And that was what set my alarms off. You have to understand, Melissa is the type of woman who moans about loading the dishwasher as if she's hauling bricks. Too heavy, too much, too unfair. Yet here she was gliding around like Martha Stewart's clone, smiling, fussing with every flower stem. The kitchen glassware sparkled so bright I could see my wrinkles clearly, then in the bathroom mirror. And remember, I'm an old engineer who can smell watered-down cement or weak steel from a mile away. This night smelled, too. It smelled fake. It didn't feel like a family party. It felt like a performance with Melissa as the star. "Dad, what do you think?" Daniel asked, his voice a little stiff. "Melissa did amazing, right?" I glanced at him, then at his wife bossing around the bartender. "If I didn't know better, I'd think she was possessed." Daniel gave a thin laugh and walked off. I kept watching. The bartender, a young guy with shampoo commercial hair, mixed cocktails exactly to Melissa's list. She hadn't just hired him, she drafted a full drink menu like this was a corporate reception. Even my old coworkers whispered, "Your daughter-in-law is quite particular, isn't she?" I just shrugged. I'd learned that the more people praised, the more cautious I needed to be. Guests poured in. My buddy Hank from the site showed up with his wife and a bottle of cheap bourbon. Lydia from next door came in a new dress, bragging about her dog's spa day. Everyone laughed, toasted, and congratulated me on a glorious retirement. I smiled politely, but my eyes never left Melissa. She floated from group to group, always in control. Every time someone mentioned the money I'd made from selling the company, her eyes flickered. When I finally said the number, 18 million, her hand clenched her glass so tight the red polish nearly scratched the rim. Some might call it admiration. I called it a calculation. I'm not a fool. 40 years in business taught me how to spot when someone sees me as prey. And that night at my own retirement party, I, the guest of honor, was the prey in Melissa's little production. One moment stuck with me. Melissa came over, placed a hand on my shoulder, voice sweet as artificial sugar. "Dad, just enjoy yourself. Let me handle everything." On the surface, it sounded kind. To my ears, it rang like, "You sit still? Your life and money are mine to handle." I sipped my whiskey, smirked to myself. In construction, I'd seen projects sold as built to last a century crumble after one rainy season. This party was the same, polished outside, cracked inside. All I had to do was wait for it to collapse, to give you a clearer picture. Daniel strutted around bragging, "My father just sold his company when his own real estate projects had tanked and the bank owned more of him than his house did." Melissa played the dutiful hostess, but whenever anyone praised me, her eyes sharpened like a razor. Jealousy doesn't hide well. My pocket watch, a keepsake from my father, sat heavy in my vest. I slipped it out. The hands pointed exactly to 6 o'clock. I thought to myself, 2 more hours. Let's see what act she's planning. I didn't know the script, but I could smell danger. And when danger is in the air, I trust my instincts more than any toast or smile. Melissa was near the drink table, laughing with a few neighbors, her hand slipping toward her purse. I didn't rush. I stepped back instead, letting the golden light throw my shadow across the wall, a quiet audience member in a theater. Glasses clinked, music played, cheers floated through the room. But I, Richard Hale, knew better. This wasn't just a retirement party. I still remember that moment as clearly as if it were replaying on a screen in my head. I was standing by the old magazine rack, pretending to listen to my buddy Hank tell the story of the time he almost won the lottery. A story I had heard at least 10 times since 1998. I nodded, kept a polite smile, but my ears only caught fragments about lucky numbers, because my attention had already drifted across the room. There was my daughter-in-law, Melissa, fussing at the drinks table. She thought she was subtle, but in a room glowing with golden light, every sneaky move looked like it was under a spotlight. Her hand opened her purse. Her eyes darted left and right like a student about to cheat on an exam. And then I saw it, a small dark glass vial fitting neatly in her palm. The chill running down my spine wasn't shock. Shock is for rookies. I've long been used to smelling trouble from miles away. What froze me was confirmation. My suspicion hadn't been paranoia. Melissa really intended to slip something into my drink, and the glass she chose. Of course, it was the whiskey glass with the faint crack on the rim, the one everyone in the house knew I always picked during parties. Melissa was smart enough to know my habits, but dumb enough to think I wouldn't notice such a detail. I didn't gasp. I didn't rush to grab the vial out of her hand. Instead, I just smiled. The same smile I'd give when a contractor handed me a so-called special offer at twice the market price. Melissa poured the liquid into the glass and stirred it lightly with a spoon. To a casual glance, it looked like she was adding orange bitters for a cocktail. But I saw something different. The drops spread into the whiskey like ink bleeding across paper, slow and sinister. When Melissa turned away to call someone, I stepped up to the table and picked up the glass. The crack on the rim glistened under the light like an old scar. I glanced at Evelyn, Melissa's mother, standing nearby, searching absent-mindedly for a drink. She was known for grabbing any glass near her purse. I thought, destiny has a sense of humor, Evelyn. I set the glass right beside her bag, then poured myself a new one from a fresh bottle. A small, clean move, unnoticed by anyone. If you've ever changed a tire in the middle of a storm to get your family home safe, you'll understand. Sometimes skill lies in making no noise at all. 10 minutes later, Evelyn picked it up like it had always been hers. "Oh, this whiskey is nice," she said, taking a sip. I shrugged, drank from my safe glass. In my head, I could almost hear my father's pocket watch chiming. "It's time." 5 minutes after that, Evelyn started to sway. I put on a look of concern. "Are you all right?" She tried to smile, said the whiskey tasted odd, metallic. I glanced at Melissa. For a split second, her face froze. Then right on cue, Evelyn collapsed. The glass flew from her hand, shattered on the floor, shards ringing like a gunshot that silenced the entire room. A second later, the screaming began. Melissa dropped to her knees beside her mother, wailing like she was auditioning for a hospital drama. "Mom, Mom," she shook her, fake tears spilling down. Anyone who hadn't seen her chew out a grocery store clerk might have believed her. I didn't. I knelt with a few neighbors, fingers at Evelyn's neck, checking for a pulse. Still there. I exhaled in relief, not because I cared about Evelyn, but because I needed her alive as a witness. My heart stayed cold as steel. Melissa's plan had just gone up in smoke in front of dozens of people. Daniel pushed through, face pale, shoving others aside. "What's happening?" He looked at his mother-in-law on the floor, then at Melissa. Just 1 second, but that look said it all. "Call 911, someone shouted. Phones lit up across the room. I stayed by Evelyn, my voice calm. Breathe slowly. "The ambulance is on its way." Beside me, Melissa howled as if in real agony. But her eyes, I'd seen that look on a construction site when concrete cracked days before inspection. The look of someone certain that the structure was about to collapse. In my head, an old saying echoed, "To catch a snake, let it believe it struck the prey." The trouble for her was, tonight the snake bit the hand that fed it. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Paramedics rushed Evelyn onto us. I've always believed chaos is when people reveal their true nature. And sure enough, right after Evelyn collapsed, Daniel turned to me, his voice dripping with worry, while his face stayed stiff as concrete before the mix. "Dad, you should stay. Rest. Melissa and I will take care of Mom." Sounds generous, doesn't it? Almost begging me not to follow the ambulance. If you think that was just kindness, then forgive me. But you're the type who'd buy insurance for a sandwich just in case. Me, I've lived long enough to know when someone wants you away from the scene, that's exactly where you belong. "I'm going," I said flatly, and I climbed into my old Ford pickup, following the ambulance under my son's less-than-pleased stare. The ER waiting room at St. Luke's was no different from a job site at dawn. Chaotic, noisy, disinfectant stinging the air mixed with the sweat of anxious families. I walked in leaning on my cane, looking like a harmless old man visiting a friend, but my mind was running blueprints of a skyscraper. Evelyn was rushed straight into the emergency. Melissa sprinted behind, her shrill voice echoing down the hall. "Mom, hang on. You'll be fine. I swear, if the town theater had auditions that night, she'd have won the lead role." I picked a seat in the corner, far enough to avoid the drama, but close enough to watch. Daniel slumped into a plastic chair, his phone buzzing nonstop. I caught a glimpse of the screen lighting up with messages before he flipped it face down like a schoolboy hiding a test. Half an hour later, a doctor appeared, sweat spotting his white coat. Clipboard in hand, calm voice. "The patient shows signs of alkaloid poisoning, most likely from a plant source. Not a drug reaction, not FOFO related." At that, Melissa dropped her tissue. Our eyes met. Panic flashed before she replaced it with overdone concern. Daniel froze too, fingers crushing his phone. I tapped my cane and stepped closer, voice low. Maybe it was the whiskey. I tossed that pebble into the still pond, and as predicted, Melissa's face tightened. "Oh, no, it couldn't be," she stammered. "I mean, Mom didn't even drink whiskey, right?" I smiled, winked at the doctor. "Well, memory gets fuzzy with age, but I could have sworn I saw her holding a whiskey glass right next to her purse." Melissa bit her lip, nodding too fast. Could be, but maybe just a coincidence." "Don't worry." Her "don't worry" rang louder than a fire alarm. Innocent people react with real shock. "Really, whiskey? Oh God, we need to check." Melissa reacted like a kid caught cheating, but still insisting I was just scratching my head. I sat back down, pulled out my pocket watch, and watched the second hand crawl. Time in hospitals moves more slowly than winter on a job site, but that slowness gave me what I wanted, time to observe. Melissa paced the linoleum, her heels clicking like a broken metronome. Daniel stared at his phone but kept sneaking glances at me. I casually told a nurse, "At my age, poisoning sounds terrifying." But luckily, she didn't drink much. I pressed on the word whiskey, and sure enough, Melissa froze mid-step, nearly tripping. She turned, her voice trembling. "Whiskey? You think? You think that's the cause?" I shrugged. "Who knows?" But she only had a few sips before she went down. Her hands shook so badly the coffee cup rattled. A drop splashed out when she tried to drink. Daniel looked at her, then at me. In that glance, I read more than a financial report. 3 hours later, the doctor returned. "The patient is stable, but she'll stay overnight for monitoring. Toxicology suggests that oleander, highly poisonous. Fortunately, she drank only a small amount." Melissa's face went pale, though she forced a sigh of relief. "Thank God." I laid a hand gently on her shoulder. "Yes, very lucky." By the time I drove my old pickup back home, the clock was creeping toward midnight. The house glowed like I had left every light on, as if I was saving electricity for whoever planned to inherit it. I walked in, hung my jacket over the chair, and poured myself a fresh bourbon from an unopened bottle. Tonight, I wanted no surprises from half-finished ones. I sat at my desk and opened the old leather notebook that had followed me since the first days of building my company. The cover still carried a dusting of cement, a reminder that what I had built didn't come from inheritance, but from calloused hands. I flipped a page, picked up a pen, and began listing the so-called support I had given Daniel and his precious wife. I never called it support before. I called it an investment in family happiness. Sounds better, doesn't it? But looking at the numbers now, I felt like a fool who signed a bridge contract without calculating the load. 2008, paid Daniel's MBA tuition $60,000. I still remember Melissa crying, saying she wanted him to have the best chance. I nodded like an idiot, thinking a diploma would anchor him in business. The result? 2 failed real estate projects right after graduation. 2010, down payment for the dream home in the suburbs, $75,000. Melissa said she wanted a safe place for the children they would have one day. Still no children, just endless kitchen remodels, curtains swapped, and sofas replaced like they were auditioning for a home design show. 2013. Credit card debt, 25,000. Daniel promised just this once, Dad. If I got $10 every time he said that line, I'd be richer than selling the company. 2016, Melissa's handcrafted jewelry boutique, 40,000 in startup money. I've never seen a store that sold less than a vending machine at a laundromat. 2018 to now, 2 to 3,000 a month for emergencies. Total close to 50 grand, altogether nearly $250,000 in less than 5 years. I stared at the number and chuckled. Not out of joy, out of disgust. I looked like a fool who signed without reading the fine print. Then the truth hit me. To Daniel and Melissa, this money wasn't gift, not gratitude. To them, it was an advance on their inheritance. They saw me as a bank with a credit limit called Dad. I laughed out loud, bourbon rippling in my glass. People say that when parents give, children remember with gratitude. In my house, when parents give, children remember to ask for more. I still remember last week when Daniel beamed as he said, Dad, I read about Sunset Pines. It's like a resort. Spa, golf, everything. You'd be living on vacation. I looked him straight in the eye and nodded. Sounds like prison with better carpet. Instead of bars, they use thick rugs. Instead of chains, they give you diet menus and curfews. Daniel laughed nervously and changed the subject. But Melissa's eyes lit up like someone had just tossed her the keys to a vault. Sunset Pines wasn't a resort. It was a plan. A place to stash me away, declare me too old to manage my affairs, and then sign off my assets. A resort, sure, if crooks were running it. I turned a few more pages, sketching financial ties like blueprints. One line from me to Daniel, tuition, down payment, debt. One line from me to Melissa, boutique, jewelry, those market research trips. Each arrow was money. The page looked like a plumbing system riddled with leaks. And when pipes leak that badly, water never reaches where it's needed. Only this time, the water was $18 million from the company sale. And I had the sickening feeling Melissa was eyeing the main valve. I pulled out my pocket watch, listening to its tick as if it were warning me. Careful, Richard. Time to seal the leaks. My father once told me, money doesn't ruin people. It amplifies who they already are. If he was right, Daniel was always weak and Melissa was always greedy. Money just stripped away the disguise. I drained my bourbon and leaned back. A plan began to take shape. If they thought I was a bank, it was time the bank announced credit was maxed out. More than that, this bank had lawyers, new security, and an old man not so easy to dump into Sunset Pines like a docile lamb. That night, I wrote one last line in my notebook. No more support. From now on, it's war. I closed the book and let out. The next morning, I put on a dark gray suit, knotted an old wrinkled tie, and drove straight to the office of Mark Coleman. He'd been my lawyer for over 20 years, a thin man with a scalp polished like shoe leather, steel-rimmed glasses, and a habit of looking at me not as a friend, but as a potential lawsuit. Truth be told, that was why I trusted him. A good lawyer never sees you as a buddy. He sees you as a profitable project. Mark's office on the 12th floor was all dark wood and the smell of leather. I walked in, he looked up from a pile of papers and gave a dry smile. Richard, I heard your retirement party was lively. I sat down, set my cane aside, poured water from a crystal pitcher. Lively is a polite word. A guest collapsed foaming at the mouth, and I discovered my whiskey glass had been upgraded. Mark raised an eyebrow. I take it you weren't the one who drank it. You guessed right. My daughter-in-law picked the wrong audience for her rehearsal. Her own mother drank it for me. Mark laid down his pen, folded his arms. That tells me enough to know this isn't family drama anymore. Richard, do you realize that if killing you is too messy, Daniel and Melissa might go another way? Guardianship. They could petition the court, claim you've lost capacity. I laughed, the sound bouncing off polished wood. I just sold my company for $18 million. Negotiated for 6 months, read every line of fine print. If that's what losing capacity looks like, half the senators out there should be booked into a group nursing home. Mark stayed serious. You're wealthy, Richard. And in their eyes, wealthy plus 68 equals easy target. All it takes is a friendly doctor, a couple of vague reports about memory decline, and one well-timed accident. Suddenly you're deemed incompetent. Every signature void. They get guardianship. They get the money. I drum my fingers on the desk. You paint a scarier picture than any crooked contractor's cement quote. Exactly, Mark said, pushing his glasses up. But I'm the only painter here who knows how to redraw the plans. And trust me, we'll build them a legal maze thicker than any concrete wall you ever poured. I leaned back, crossed my arms. I like the sound of a maze. Go on. Mark opened a file, pulled out 3 documents. First, set up a new trust. Transfer everything into it with airtight conditions. Beneficiaries? Not Daniel, not Melissa. You can pick a niece, a charity. The key is, if anyone challenges your competency, the trust automatically flips to charity. I smirked. Nice. The harder they try to prove I'm senile, the faster they shoot themselves in the foot. Second, update your will. Leave Daniel a token, just enough to scrape by. Melissa gets nothing. She's already shown her hand. Leaving her even a penny is too generous, I muttered, sipping water. Third, Mark went on, you need an independent psych evaluation. A doctor with credibility, not one of Melissa's pocket physicians. The report will certify you're fully competent, filed, notarized, ready to slam in their faces if they ever try. I grinned. A paper saying I'm not senile. I'll frame it right next to my very first building permit. Mark didn't smile. He flipped another page. Finally, and this is the part I find amusing, we prepare a dummy POA, a power of attorney that grants them access to one account with exactly $1 in it. The account sits at a local bank, waiting for them to grab. I clapped once. Mark, you're an artist. You sketch out comedy sharper than Melissa's performance in the hospital. He shrugged. When they celebrate, thinking they just seized your fortune, all they'll have is a check worth a can of soda. By the time they realize, everything else is locked in the trust. I leaned back and laughed, deep and loud. Just imagine Melissa's face when she discovers she's the CEO of $1. I almost want to double your fee just to watch it. Mark closed the file and fixed his eyes on me. Richard, remember, this isn't just money. It's your life. If they already spiked your whiskey, they won't hesitate to go further. I tilted my head, which is exactly why I strike back. At 68, I have no interest in defense. I once won contracts against 4 undercutting firms. I once built a bridge across a swamp when everyone said impossible. Trust me, I know how to turn disadvantage into leverage. Mark nodded. Then let's get started. I'll need your signature on these and my advice, upgrade security at your house. Cameras, alarms, even a panic button. They think you're old and gullible. When the police knock, they'll find you sharper than anyone. I signed, steady and firm. Then I looked at Mark and said with a bitter smile, Melissa thinks she's building a Broadway stage. Too bad for her. I've already hired the better director. And in this play, I won't be the victim. I'll be the man in the front row with popcorn, watching her act until the curtain drops. 3 days after the hospital incident, sodden, the doorbell rang at exactly 9 in the morning. I checked the new camera system, thank you, Mark, for that advice, and saw Daniel and Melissa standing on the porch. Daniel held a fat stack of documents like he was pitching a bridge project, while Melissa wore the sweetest smile this side of a church painting. I opened the door, cane in hand. Good morning, the two of you. Here this early for breakfast? I hope you brought donuts. Melissa's smile widened, her voice dripping with fake concern. We brought something better than donuts. We brought a solution for your future. If there were an Oscar for lying with lipstick, Melissa would have cleared the stage. We sat in the living room. Daniel opened his case and laid out dozens of papers neatly on the coffee table. Bold titles leapt out at me. Sunset Pines Admission Agreement, Financial Disclosure Form, Power of Attorney. Looking at that pile, I felt less like a retiree and more like someone being pressured to sell the Hoover Dam. Dad, Daniel began, his tone solemn, we've done the research. Sunset Pines is perfect. You'll have 24-hour medical care, golf courses, spa, friends your own age. You'll never be lonely again. I sipped my coffee, smirked. Are you selling me a nursing home or a Cancun vacation package? Daniel flushed, pressed on. For it all to run smoothly, you just need to sign a few forms. The admission contract, disclosure, and this POA. I'll manage your finances so you don't have to worry. Melissa slid closer, her hand landing gently on my knee as if to comfort me. But her eyes lit up like a kid spotting an ATM spitting free cash. If she had a button to push, she'd have shouted jackpot. I tilted my head, feigned hesitation. Sounds reasonable? I'm old. Maybe I do need someone to handle things. But so many papers. What if I signed the wrong one? Melissa rushed in, syrupy sweet. Oh, Dad, just trust us. Everything is only to protect you. You know we always think of you. I nearly laughed in her face. If thinking of me meant poisoning my whiskey, then yes, she thought of me often. I sighed theatrically, took the pen Daniel offered. All right then, if it makes you both feel better, I'll sign. Melissa lit up so bright her mascara nearly cracked. Daniel straightened in his chair like he'd just closed a $1 billion deal. I signed page after page, my signature crawling across each line. But the crown jewel was the POA, the dummy Mark had drafted. On paper, it gave full control over one lonely bank account with exactly $1. That's right, a single dollar. When the ink dried, I looked Daniel dead in the eye and said, "There, now you have everything." In my head, the words echoed like a chuckle. Good luck, son. Good luck managing an account worth one can of soda. Melissa clutched the stack of papers, glowing. You won't regret this. From now on, you'll live safe, comfortable, worry-free. I nodded calmly. I believe it. I always believe the people who poisoned my whiskey. I believe family. Daniel missed the jab, gave a stiff smile. He was never as good at acting as his wife. When they left, I stood at the window and watched their Mercedes shoot out of the driveway. I pictured them marching into the bank, proud, only to be told the account balance was $1. I almost wanted to install a camera in the branch just to capture their faces. I chuckled, poured another bourbon. The sip was smoother than any sedative. Trying to lock me in Sunset Pines, huh? I muttered. Good luck. I built my career knee-deep in mud and rebar. A resort with a swimming pool won't scare me. The only thing I fear is being forced to drink kale smoothies again. In that bitter laugh, I knew I'd won a round. But the war wasn't over. Melissa and Daniel would try again. Greed doesn't stop. But this time, I'd set the trap. And when it snapped shut, they'd learn the truth. The game was never about nursing homes. It was about who leaves the board first. The next morning, I hadn't even taken my first sip of coffee when the doorbell rang. On the camera screen, I saw two police officers in sharp uniforms, flanked by Mark Coleman, my lawyer who looked like he'd just been cast for a cameo in a legal drama. I opened the door, leaning on my cane, voice casual. If you're here to sell insurance, you're late. My daughter-in-law already bought me a very special policy. Mark smirked while the female officer introduced herself. I'm Detective Harris. This is Detective Monroe. We need to speak with you about the incident at your retirement party. Oh, that party, I said, nodding. My floor still has the stains, and I could fill a trash bag with broken glass. But please, come in. I promise no whiskey this time. We sat in the living room. Harris laid a file on the table and opened it. Her voice was direct. We tested the leftover whiskey from that night. Results show oleander extract. Highly toxic. A full glass could kill in under 15 minutes. I raised an eyebrow and gave a low whistle. Well, good thing I only had fresh bourbon. That whiskey was a one-way ticket to the cemetery. Mark nodded, cutting in. We suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed makes it clear. Detective Monroe flipped a page and slid over a photocopy. We also uncovered a life insurance policy worth $400,000. Purchased by Melissa Hale. The insured, Richard Hale. I chuckled, stroking my chin. Life insurance for a father-in-law. Modern filial piety. If devotion had a price tag, Melissa would set the gold standard. Just then the door opened. Daniel and Melissa walked in, no doubt expecting to talk strategy about shipping me off to the nursing home. Instead, they found police waiting. Melissa froze for a second, then plastered on a shaky smile. Oh my, what's going on? Detective Harris rose, voice firm. Melissa Hale, you are under arrest for attempted murder. We have proof of oleander in the whiskey and an unusual insurance policy. Melissa went pale, shouting, No, I just bought it as a precaution. I care about him. I lifted my bourbon into the morning light, amber glowing as I swirled it. Cheers, daughter-in-law. The cocktail you mixed was dangerous, but I prefer the safe kind. No need for precaution. I have no plans to die rich for your benefit. Daniel stood frozen, face drained. He stammered, "No, this can't be." Detective Monroe pulled out a phone, placed it on the table. "Mr. Hale, we also retrieved your text messages." One reads, "She asked me about the will, worried Dad might change beneficiaries." Then, "Don't worry, in a few days he won't be able to decide anything." "Do you deny these are yours?" Daniel grabbed the phone, eyes wide. Then he collapsed into a chair, mumbling, I I didn't know Melissa was going to poison him. I thought we were just pushing him into the nursing home." I laughed cold as steel. "So my son was fine with faking senility, locking me in Sunset Pines, robbing me blind. Only when his wife poured poison did he cry foul. Moral progress, I suppose." Melissa thrashed as Harris cuffed her. "Richard, you're destroying this family. You'll regret it." I took a sip of bourbon, eyes fixed on her. "Family. That's funny. I always thought family meant cake and candles, not toxins and whiskey." As police hauled Melissa out, Daniel slumped, head in his hands. He no longer looked like a grown man. He looked like the 10-year-old boy caught stealing candy from the jar, except this time the candy was attempted patricide. I let the silence hang, then spoke. "Daniel, you wanted me to sign papers, hand over my money, and spend my last days at your Sunset Pines resort. You had a script. Too bad you forgot your father once built a dam with bare hands and a crew of hardened men. I know how to hold foundations steady. You built castles in sand." Daniel looked up, eyes red, voice shaking. I just thought we needed the money. I thought you didn't understand." I set down my glass and leaned back, smirking. "Oh, I understand. I understand that in your mind, fatherhood is measured in dollars. I understand that caring for me meant worrying I wasn't dying fast enough. Trust me, son, I understand perfectly." When the police left, Melissa in cuffs and Daniel half broken, I stood and poured myself another drink. Sunlight caught the amber, glowing. I raised the glass and murmured to myself, "Trying to con this old man. Cheers. Too bad for you, I drink stronger than your poison." I drained the glass, the clink on the table sharp as a nail driven home. The game was over. Melissa thought she was the one moving pieces. She was only a pawn. Daniel thought he'd share the winnings. All he got was debt and shame. And me, I was still in the front row, bourbon in hand, watching the curtain fall. 3 months after the night police cuffed Melissa in my living room, the Hale family turned a page only I was clear-headed enough to flip. News spread fast, like the smell of wet concrete in the rain. Melissa got 15 years for attempted murder and insurance fraud. Daniel wept in court, blaming everything on his wife. But those sweet little text messages between them were enough to earn him 3 years for conspiracy. Honestly, lighter than the sentence I would have chosen, a lifetime living with his mother-in-law behind bars. And me. I stayed in the same house, same rose garden, same wooden table my father built in 1962. The only difference was now I had more cameras than a toll station, and I drank my whiskey with a new kind of peace. The peace of knowing that if there was poison, the poisoner was already in prison. I sat there, pocket watch beside my glass, afternoon sun glinting off rose petals. I listened to the tick of the second hand, like my father whispering, "You see, when the foundation is strong, the structure stands." The phone rang. I answered and heard a young voice. "Grandpa, it's Emily. Can I come visit you this weekend?" Emily, my only granddaughter, sharper than her parents ever were. She never asked about money, never hinted at nursing homes, never schemed about wills. She only asked, "Are you all right? I miss you." Hearing that, I knew the next generation still had hope. I smiled, nodded to myself. "Of course, Emily. I'll always have a place for you." Now I turn to you, my audience, listening from somewhere. Maybe Florida, maybe Texas, maybe as far as frozen Alaska. Have you ever been pressured by your own children or in-laws to sign papers? Have you ever heard them say it's only to give you peace of mind while sliding a power of attorney across the table? Share your stories in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I bet every place has at least one child or spouse who thinks they're smarter than the parents. I lifted my glass, let the amber light sparkle, and smirked. And if you believe silence and the law can be the sharpest weapons, hit subscribe and ring the bell. I promise, no one is slipping poison into that button. I already checked. I leaned back, breathing in the roses on the breeze. The smile stayed, but my eyes stayed sharp. They think old age means powerless. But believe me, anyone who underestimates a 68-year-old man is asking for trouble. I raised my glass, clinked it against the air, and drank it down. Whiskey burned warm and clean, no toxins, no aftertaste. Just like the justice I had built, clear, solid, and leaving no room for the greedy.